Hi, I'm Alicia.
And I'm Robin, and you're listening to Bowel Moments,
the podcast sharing real talk about the realities of IBD. Served on the rocks. This week, we talked to Christine Rich. Christine is a successful executive, wife, mother, nonprofit board member, and author of the book Chronic. And boy, did we go deep with her, including, as a trigger warning, talking about eating disorders. This is a little longer than usual, but so worth it. So let's jump right in. Cheers.
Hi, guys. Welcome to Bowel Moments. This is Robin.
Hey guys, this is Alicia, and we are really excited to have our first published author. Well, actually, okay, I shouldn't say that because the doctors have been published, but how about our first patient published author? I don't want to sell. I don't want to sell our doctors short here, but so Christine Rich, welcome to the show. We are really excited to talk to you about your book and tell us more about it in a second. However, we really started out with an amazing question of what are you drinking?
Oh, first of all, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here. And what I am drinking is something that I've really gotten into over the last year and a half. It's become sort of an obsession, but it's tea. And I've become a bit of a tea snob. So I built this entire tea cabinet situation in my dining room. And I'm trying to turn to tea in the evening instead of wine to manage stress. But there's just something about the ritual of heating the water. And I do a lot of loose leaf teas. I am cheating tonight. I am drinking my lemon loaf tea that is absolutely delicious. It's like a dessert, but I have a really great tummy tea that I often turn to in the evenings if my stomach doesn't feel great. And I don't know if it's placebo effect or not, but
whatever works.
It works for me.
Exactly. Robin, what about you?
I am drinking a concoction that I just threw together. So I was feeling a little spiced rum, and I have some pineapple juice, which I just want to let everyone know that this is the first time I'm actually drinking fruit juice. And even though I added fruit back into my diet after the J pouch, I did not add fruit juice back into my diet. I had cranberry every once in a while, but this is pineapple is serious business. There's a lot of, yes. It could come out in a bad situation, but I'm going for it because I wanted some rum and pineapple.
You're brave. During live recording too. We'll see if we have for a little run to the restroom.
Mm-hmm. If Robin suddenly disappears, we know why.
We'll know why. You're in good company, right?
Yeah. What are you drinking, Alicia?
I'm drinking a lemon basil margarita. So this is what it looks like. Yes. And this is in the beautiful glass that Robin gave me. Cheers, guys.
Cheers. And to clarify, I love an adult beverage. My adult beverage of choice lately has been this orange infused gin. So good.
That's lovely. You'll have to send me the name of that one because I love gin.
I was afraid to drink alcohol because I'm a really cheap date and I didn't want to tell you all my secrets, although I wrote about all of my secrets in Chronic. So it would have been no harm.
Christine, again, thank you so much for joining us. We're very excited to have you. And now, next question, tell us your IBD story.
Sure. So way back in the mid to late 90s, when I was about 15 or 16, it started on a vacation with my girlfriends. We had all gone on a family vacation, and my girlfriends were laughing and they said, "You go to the bathroom a lot. Every time after you eat, you're running to the bathroom. What's the deal? We don't poop for 3 days." And, I kind of laughed it off and was like, I don't know. So it started out sort of as simple as that. And it just increasingly got worse and worse over probably the next 12 to 18 months. And it got to the point where it wasn't just, a few times or after a meal, it was multiple times a day. And my biggest tell, my biggest Crohn's tell is I'm a bleeder. And so was experiencing blood in my stool. And, as a kid, I was scared. And one of the things I recognized that I now hear so many stories that just frosts my cookies is, it was a lot of, oh, it's probably just a hemorrhoid. Oh, you're probably just a little anxious and have a nervous stomach. And it's these signs of I get to the point, fast forward to right before my senior year, where I am rapidly losing weight. I am falling asleep in class. I can barely make it through the day. I used to babysit my cousins after school and, God bless my aunt. I mean, I couldn't even stay awake. I remember waking up after sleeping through the night and feeling exhausted. And there was a young woman in my high school who actually passed away from stomach cancer about a year or two earlier. And I was so terrified because even though I was this, teenage girl with not a whole lot of life experience, I just knew something was wrong. And I was so afraid. So my mom takes us to our general practitioner. And it's funny, I was just had a conversation with someone who knew this doctor today, my new doctor. She basically was like, yeah, again, I think you're fine. It's probably nothing. Doesn't order blood tests, asks, I can give you a rectal exam if you want. What 16, 17-year-old girl wants a rectal exam? Not this one. So long story short, we kind of went round and round with my general practitioner for a while. And to my mom's credit, she really, at some point she was like, my daughter is wasting away. She can barely eat. She's always in the bathroom. She looks horrible. Like I was just no color. I was freezing all the time. I remember I was cold all the time. Long story short, eventually got a diagnosis after probably what was a year and a half of Crohn's disease it was my senior year in high school. And I was severely anemic, which hence the lack of color, lack of energy. I was very malnourished. Nothing was really being absorbed. And that really started my journey. And I will say, as a senior in high school, I got the diagnosis. My parents were devastated and upset, and I just shut down. I was like, I'm fine. This isn't a big deal. I don't want to talk about it. Goodbye. And that led up to some very complicated experiences throughout my young adult life that I had to learn the hard way how to care for myself and how to grieve and really to trust my body, which was hard because from 15 on, my body didn't feel safe. It felt like something that was always trying to hurt me and take me down. So it's been quite a journey, and I don't think it's something that's talked about enough in the IBD community.
We're starting to see people talk about it more, I feel like. So first of all, your book is Chronic, and I purchased it on Amazon. So it is available on Amazon. I'm holding your book in my hand right now while we're talking to you. And I am going to be completely honest with you. It was hard for me to read at first. I mean, not because it's not well written or, anything like that, just as a patient and recently having very traumatic experiences, which anybody who's listened to the podcast has heard, like my horror story over the past few years with the J pouch. It was like I had to put it down a couple of times because it was just like, reliving that. And I realized over the past year and a half, I've realized that I don't trust my body again. It's like this cycle of, oh, maybe it's doing what it's supposed to be doing. And then all of a sudden something happens. So like, oh, I can't trust this. I can't trust this vessel that I'm living in again. So I thank you for writing it. And also it was very hard to read.
My husband said that to me.
Thank you for writing it. And it was very hard to read.
Yeah, he actually said he hasn't read the whole thing. He said it made me so sad. Think of you as a young woman going through that. He's like, it was sad because I know you. And I will say there is a lot of humor in it as well. I thought you couldn't read it because there was too much swearing.
No, oh my God, we swear on this show. Please. Okay, good. No,
because I was no holds barred, man. I'm going for it. So,
and then I got angry on your behalf. Like especially through the first part. So you have it divided up into like 3 sections: freeze, flight, and then
it's 4 parts. So
it's 4 parts.
It is 4 parts. So I am a big lover of all things therapy.
Oh, and then friendship. Freeze, flight, fight, friendship.
Friendship. Yeah. So the classic anxiety is the whole fight or flight, your body's response to anxiety. They recently talked about a third one, which is freeze, which is another response to anxiety. And so I broke it up into fight, flight, freeze, and then a new F, not the F word, but the best F word, which is friendship.
Oh, I don't know. I think the other F word might be the best F word.
It actually is the best F word. But yeah, the last one that I wanted to challenge myself, to hold myself accountable to, and to challenge readers to is like, is it possible to befriend our bodies? And there's a lot to unpack in there. And for a long time, I was like, middle finger, you gave me the middle finger. So middle finger right back, body. And didn't work.
So Christine, the part that I don't want to start at the beginning. Like I'm going to jump all over. I'm sorry. I'm just telling you right now, I'm going to jump
all over. That's how I roll, Robin. That's how I roll too.
So this page I have dog-eared, and I read it again today before we jumped on with you, but it's about noticing your lumps or recognizing your lumps. And I don't want to give anything away in my description or understanding of it. So could you please talk to me about that realization that you came to? Because when I read it, I was like, I probably gasped out loud, honestly. Like I have little goosebumps right now. It was a total aha. So can you talk about that?
I don't worry about giving anything away. I would ask you to let me know what gave you goosebumps in particular, and then I will answer the question. I will talk more about noticing the lumps.
In this journey that I've been going on since my most recent surgeries and trying to figure out how to trust my body again, I'm going to start crying right now. And we have been talking for 15 minutes. I don't even know.
I'm going to hold your hand while you talk. Okay. Virtually hold your hand.
I am like a very strong, confident, no nonsense, get the job done kind of person. And so this past year and a half has really thrown me for a loop. I was having panic attacks. I like had to start seeing the therapist. And I've said this on the show before. I literally like thought that I was going to go to a therapist for a couple of sessions and she was going to give me the tools and tricks that I needed in order to not have panic attacks anymore, because I couldn't go into a doctor's office or a hospital without having a panic attack. And I still had another surgery that I had to get through, which entailed multiple procedures. So after my second or third session, and I was like, oh, this is great. I'm better. I can handle the panic attacks. About like 2 or 3 weeks later, I was like, oh no, I need to keep seeing this therapist. And she just was on leave for a little while. So I didn't have any appointments with her for the entire holidays. And I just met with her again last week. And reading your words about recognizing the lumps, it just kind of was the thread that wove all of that together for me, as far as like, this is how I'm going to be able to acknowledge what my body is telling me without panicking. Because right now it's like, just like you said, blood in the toilet, right? Is that a hemorrhoid, or is my J pouch bleeding, or is it something more severe, or, you know, the range of things that it could be for us. Not going into that panic mode, that freeze mode, that
flight mode. Yeah.
So that I'm not being very eloquent right now, because I
got you.
At least I'm not on the verge of tears anymore.
Tears are okay, and it helps to release nasty chemicals in our bodies. So,
yes, that's
Robin,
right.
I completely feel you. I, for years, was like, badass bitch, nothing's gonna take me down, small but mighty, F you Crohn's, like I'm gonna just rise and grind and nothing's gonna stop this little lady. And it was a facade. It was just another way to run away from myself. And so when I talk about noticing the lumps in the book, I tell a story of, so the year I was 29, actually the day before my 29th birthday, I went into the ER, thought I had a UTI. Turns out I had pancreatitis. That kicked off a whole host of health issues for that year that really woke my ass up. And March was when I went in for my first ER visit. And PS, I talked my way out of being admitted to the hospital with pancreatitis. So I was real convincing. Fast forward to July of that same year, I completely was breaking down. You know, I had 2 little babies. I was working full time. I was rising and grinding. I'm not going to cry. I'm not going to, not going to admit defeat to this stupid disease. That did not work so well. My doctor, I kept kind of pushing him off. Long story short, he's like, come in for a sigmoid. We'll take a quick look. I think it was smart of him, because in my drug-induced state, he was like, we need to admit you immediately, which is probably the only way I was going. Like, I was just like, I'm going down with the ship. I am fine. I feel like, little tip for listeners, if you find yourself saying I'm fine over and over again, chances are you're probably not. So I want you to please pay attention. When you hear yourself saying I'm fine, writing I'm fine, thinking I'm fine, that is a total tell that you are anything but. And that's okay. So I spent a week in the hospital. They did intravenous steroids. I was like a caged animal. You know, you take away a type A girl's cell phone, computer, all the things that distract us from what we're terrified of. And it was like a spiritual awakening. I think Brene Brown calls it a breakdown or a breakthrough, whichever one you want to categorize it as, but it was. But when I got out of the hospital, I was no better than when I went in. I had lost even more weight. You could see every bone in my chest and my arms. It was like my hips were jutting out. My hair was falling out, and I couldn't even walk up the steps. I mean, I was like an elderly person at 29. But one day, and there's more tests and more things, and I'm just so exhausted. And it was literally like the first time someone told me I had Crohn's disease and like what it actually meant. I started grieving, and I was like, I don't want to deal with all this. I don't want to have to do all these things. And then I got out of the shower one day, and I was just sort of laying on the bed with just, in my bra. And my husband comes over and he's like, hey, and I'm like, hey, whatever. And he's like, whoa. And I was like, whoa, what? And he's like, what is that lump? And I was like, what is what lump? And he's like, Chris, I can see a lump to the right of your collarbone, like your chest bone, and I was like, wait, what? I mean, I hadn't even noticed it. I had a huge lump in my right breast and my stomach dropped. And he's like, that is really big. I can literally see it as you're lying there. So like, obviously I had lost a lot of weight, first their place that goes is your breast usually. So there wasn't much to break through. And he's like, you need to call the doctor tomorrow. And I was like, no, I'm not doing that. And he was like, why aren't you doing that? And I was like, I literally can't handle one more thing. I can't do it. And he was like, babe, you got to call the doctor. And so I did a lot of, thinking, and I was like, here's the thing. What we resist persists in any area of our life, whether it's physical, emotional, mental, spiritual. And I was starting to realize at the tender age of 29 that I could no longer ignore these things in my body, these things in my gut, not just my like physical gut, but my emotional gut. And so I went to my doctor, and no one knew this. I tell my friends this. My parents didn't even know. I was just like, oh my God. Long story short, I went to the doctor. We went through many tests, many scans, many biopsies. I actually had to get a lumpectomy before they told me it wasn't cancer. P.S. It is in the middle of the worst flare-up of my life, maybe needing to get a bag and major surgery. And what I realized was I can't be afraid of noticing these things in my body, physical, spiritual, emotional, mental, whatever. And it was okay. And I realized that I am stronger when I face things and care for my body like I would my children versus ignoring it and getting mad at it. Because I did that for over 10 years and it just like was not working anymore. And I thought, this is the first time in my adult life I actually faced something in real time, didn't put it off. The most recent flare I had been experiencing, I put off for over a year, probably actually 2 if I really think about it. And I just felt like no more running, just face it head on and you will be okay. And so that was just, sort of my whole thing about noticing the lumps. I mean, I was walking around with a huge lump in my breast that you could physically see on the outside of my body, and was just that detached from my own body that I didn't even see it, which also, like, who wants to be battling potential breast cancer and, Crohn's disease? So just notice the lumps and like face it. I'm telling you, I promise you, it seems scary to face it, but it's scarier to not. I think that's where the panic attacks come in. Mm-hmm. Building it up. And I realized, like, I'm not going to worry. Truly, I'm not going to worry until someone tells me I need to worry about something. So I'm just going to keep doing the next step, the next right thing. And it luckily worked out, and I'm grateful, but it was a really good lesson that it doesn't always end, in tragedy or another thing to take care of. And sometimes it does, but I knew that I would have to face it eventually. So.
Do you mind if I read it, the little section that you have in your book about the changes? Because
I would love to.
I feel like it's going to have a huge impact. And also, we want everyone who's listening to go get your book.
Thank you.
So you have a section on changes, and change number 2, notice the lumps. I noticed my lump. No, not the one in my breast, although that is just as important. The one in my throat. The one I prefer to shove down and swallow the moment I'm faced with an emotionally uncomfortable or vulnerable situation. I'm fine. Created that lump in my throat.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, those lumps. I didn't realize this, but I have been working, I would say, really doing the hard work of therapy, probably more so over the last 5 years. And I went to a therapist, and she really coached me on how to get in my body and feel my feelings. And of course I was like, I don't know what you mean. And every time she said, close your eyes, what are you feeling? Get into your body. It would always be a lump in my throat. And the more she asked me about my emotions, the more she asked me about my trauma, it would get so tight and so hard. It felt like it was choking me, and I could barely talk, and it physically hurt. And what that taught me was that actually had been happening my entire life. And so once I was able to access that emotional lump, which is where I carry my trauma, I believe it lives in the body, I was able to not let it choke me out anymore. An example would be, something as small as being with someone who is saying or doing something that's upsetting me. I can feel it catch in my throat now. It's like a physical sensation I feel. So blood, when I go to the bathroom, is my Crohn's tell. That pain or that lump in my throat is my, like, something is off emotionally, and I'm not comfortable with this tell. And so I think it's really important for women, especially, whatever it is that is your intuition, that is your tell in your body that happens, just notice it. It's there for a reason. It's like this little friend inside of you. I really believe it's like the child in you that's like, please notice me. Please just like help me. And once I started thinking of my illness, my anxiety, all of it as just this small child asking for attention, it really shifted the way that I thought about my body and my relationship to my body. But when your body hurts a majority of the time, you don't feel like your body's a safe place to be, but I'm here to tell you it really can be. And I can't overemphasize enough the importance of finding a good therapist to help you walk through that. I don't think I would have been able to come to that realization on my own.
Yes, we encourage everyone on this show. Almost every episode, some kind of mental health support comes up.
You know why that is? Because your brain is part of your body. Like it's physical health too, right?
Mhm.
I always think that's so interesting. You know, we're going through some insurance things right now where the therapy that one of my kids is receiving and I was receiving, it's 100% out of pocket. And I'm like, they're like, well, we're your health insurance, but we don't cover that. And I'm like, but that is part of my body too. So,
It's incredibly frustrating. And I think something a lot of our folks deal with is like, it's just another appointment to make. It's another
Yes.
thing to argue with your insurance about. It's another person you have to tell your story to. And I think that can be really overwhelming and frustrated for folks, but so vital. I really believe that very, very strongly. You know, you mentioned women and bodies, and there's so much to unpack there just in general. But one of the things when we were talking about you and looking you up and doing our research, you mentioned this concept of unladylikeness of inflammatory bowel disease. And about how, like you said, that sort of stifles your voice in a lot of ways because ladies don't talk about these things. Ladies don't get angry.
No.
Talk a little bit about that concept.
So again, I think this is how we start to notice the lumps is by, I'm not going to say every young lady grew up in this way. I can only speak for myself and a lot of women that I know. I grew up, and I think like many of us did, and it's just part of society. Women, at the end of the day, I'm going to get all I'm going to say it, the patriarchy, whatever it is, like women in society, it's not a explicitly stated thing, are meant to be appealing. We're meant to be physically appealing. We're meant to be appealing in the things that we say and do and how we behave and take care of other people. We're supposed to, not talk about poop, farts, diarrhea, anal bleeding, mucus, rectums. I'll go on and on, girl. If you want to silence a room, say the word rectum. It's like, whew. I was at a women's conference and was talking about the book. And I was like, you could play a drinking game. How many times I say rectum in this book? And it was like crickets. And I was like, hey, we all got them. Well, most of us have them. I'm like, raise your hand if you have a rectum. And I could tell they were like a little uncomfortable, but I'm like, it's a body part. So I just think that I, kind of grew up thinking, the straightest line to acceptance and being a good girl was to be appeasing and appealing, which means not being too much of any one thing. And, I have done a lot of work and enough reflection to know that, my go-to emotion when things are high and intense is anger. And I think because for so long, I didn't know how to appropriately express my anger because it wasn't a permissible emotion. And for a lot of women, it's not. It's funny. I was chatting with someone today and it's like, well, yeah, when the guys are like that, they're passionate and they're driven. And when the girls are like that, they're just emotional and bitchy. And it's like, so what do you do with that? I have really, really learned through a lot of therapy and journaling and just self-reflection, like anger is there to tell you something and it's really important to listen to. And oftentimes people will say anger is a secondary emotion. There's something beneath the anger. And so to me, and I've talked to my girls about this, I think about it when I feel that anger rising, I try to take a moment and think, okay, what is this really about? Is it frustration? Is it sadness? Is it fear? Because a lot of times emotions will come out sideways as anger. And P.S., sometimes it's just fucking anger because it makes me angry that women have to fight so hard to get a diagnosis. It makes me angry that they're so often told that they're just anxious and that they have to beg for tests. That should make you angry because it's frustrating. My job is not to be a pretty little flower that is just delightful for everyone who comes in contact with me. But I thought it was for a very long time. And that's a hard gig to keep up. And I know a lot of folks struggle with that. And it's easy to slip back into that, but it's just another way that we silence ourselves. So I don't know if that answers your question, but
it definitely does. And I agree with you, especially when the response to when you are not being that is so negative, I think, so it feels like you're swimming upstream because everybody kind of goes, oh, who does she think she is? She's so bitchy. You get that like sort of negative feedback for when you're being something that people don't expect from you anymore. And I think that's really frustrating. And
I think there's a big difference between anger and rudeness and directness. I didn't know for the longest time I could say no to a myriad of things. I didn't know that I could push back on a professional physician. I didn't know that I could say, I actually don't want to do that. Let's talk about another option. I didn't know I could insist on getting tests. One of the stories I always tell, and I'm like, that was an aha moment. When I was giving birth to my first daughter, I'm very lucky. I have babies really quickly. And it was my second daughter. I entered the hospital triage and they were like, oh my gosh, you're 9 centimeters dilated. And I was like, ruh-roh. And I was not even admitted to a room yet. And I said, okay, I want to get an epidural. And they were like, no, there's no time. And I said, no, there's time. I want an epidural. No, you can't get it. And everyone who I told the story, like, you can't get an epidural that late. And I said, you absolutely can. I insisted. I said, I am in pain. I don't want to do this without an epidural. I want an epidural. Before you even get in my room, I want you to go find the little man or woman with the needle in the IV and do what they need to do because this is what I want. Please give it to me. And they're like, okay. So if I didn't say anything, I wouldn't have gotten anything. And someone could have said, gee, she was really bitchy and really insistent. Yeah, I was. And you know what? I love an epidural. And so I think that's just a really important story to note that, like, I have agency over my body and I have the right to say what I need. And P.S., there is so much research and many studies around women's pain is often not believed as much as men's pain. They are under-medicated when it comes to pain. And so I just, I think it's super important to make sure that if you're not feeling well, if you're in pain, advocate for yourself. Don't let someone pat your head and like push you along with a cup of like tea. I'm getting all fired up now.
No, I love it because then this, unfortunately, the research shows that women of color are even more likely to not have their pain taken seriously. And so, yes, you have to get loud sometimes and be insistent, even if it means that people might label you in a way that you don't like. But yes, it should be recognized that this is a huge issue because, like you said, women are not being diagnosed as quickly as men. They're not being believed. They're not getting the tests, all these things. And that's only detrimental to the person whose health is at risk. The longer you go undiagnosed, the worse it's going to be, so
yes.
Yeah.
And the less options and choices that you'll have in your care. So notice the lumps, advocate for yourself, even if it feels uncomfortable and scary, especially if it feels uncomfortable and scary.
Well, and I think one of the things we talked about with one of our other guests here recently is also like, if you're not comfortable doing that, that's okay too. Get somebody to come with you who's going to be that person that's going to be loud with you or for you, because it's okay if that's not your personality. It's okay if you're really not confrontational. Then get somebody to help you so that they know what you want and they can insist on the things that you really want to happen if you're not comfortable doing it. And hopefully you will get to a point where you get more comfortable doing it yourself.
That's a really great point. I mean, it took me a long time to get to that, and having someone with you writing things down to help kind of keep your nerve. Because I don't know about you, I get into a doctor's office, I get in front of a doctor and it's like blank. The other thing that is helpful too is if you are working with a therapist, being able to advocate for yourself in many areas of your life is always a good skill to learn. And I don't think it's one that comes innately to many people. So I think even taking that time to like role play with a therapist, like, what do I do when I'm just being told, getting blown off or whatever it might be, or practice with a friend who you're like, okay, I want you to really like hold me to this and like make me say it. And I don't know, the more you practice it, the easier it gets. And you would do it for your child or your parent. You would do it for your pet, your fur baby.
Yes.
You would do it for your parent, your best friend, your spouse, your partner. You deserve the same love and care and attention that you give so freely to everybody else. And I just didn't realize that. I thought that was selfish. I thought that was being dramatic. I was tough, like you said, Robin. And I think the toughest thing you can do is tell the truth, which is freaking hard and scary.
And even for us who are tough, sometimes I have to remind myself. I have that little thing like, no, it's okay if you ask for this. My most recent scope was clear for the first time in, I don't know, years, for the first time in years.
Congratulations.
Thank you. I'm not even celebrating it. Like, y'all are like, yeah, we're clapping. And it's still now, I'm not even celebrating it. And when my doctor said, well, we can look at scheduling in a year because you have a clean scope, like immediate anxiety. And I didn't tell her at first, but I had to call her back and say, I don't feel comfortable waiting a whole year for another scope. I haven't had a clean scope in probably 5 years. And I've had 3 this year alone. And this is the first one that's clear. I don't feel comfortable waiting. Like I don't feel the relief of a clear scope. My husband was like, oh, this is so good. And I was like, no, we are not celebrating yet. I can't celebrate this news yet. I probably would need multiple clear scopes in a row in order to get to that point of not feeling unsafe, not feeling like my body's going to betray me. And so even though I am all those things and you are all those things, like I still had to like gird my loins to call my doctor back. You know, I saw that, you know, I still had to take a moment, evaluate how I was feeling, and get up the courage to call her back and say, I can't wait a year. I'm anxious right now, just relaying that story to you. Which
are you anxious like, because you
I need to write this down for my next therapy session.
Are you you're probably getting that lump in your throat or something's happening, right? So there's something there that you need to notice and feel.
For me, my chest gets tight. My chest gets, it just starts to get tight. And that's when I know.
So you know what you need to trick your brain into saying? Because I used to get those feelings and that would cause the panic and anxiety. You have to tell yourself, ooh, that's the good stuff. That's a clue. Like almost make it like a game, right? Like, okay, there's something here, needs my attention. And you know, one of the things I really appreciate is the concept of both and versus or. So you can be both concerned about waiting a year for another scope, and is it possible to take this moment today, which is truly the only moment we have? There's no future. There's no, it's this moment. And can you say, just for today, this one day at a time, I'm good. And I'm going to allow myself a minute of relief and joy. And hey, you know, internal Robin, I got you. I'm going to give you this, because the anxiety will always be there. I think challenging ourselves, we're so used to being on guard. I think that's part of like the trauma of having a chronic illness, is that you're constantly like in a state of like hypervigilance.
Yes.
Set your clock. I'm not lying to you, for 2 minutes. Put it on your phone and say, for 2 minutes, I'm going to sit here and close my eyes and thank my body and thank my doctors and thank myself, and just say like, I feel really good about this.
Maybe one day.
Maybe like 30 seconds.
Maybe one day. I am not there yet. No. Yes, and I'm being honest, like I know that I'm not there.
I got
yet.
it.
Like
I got it.
If I tried to do that right now, I would just be angry at myself, because it's not, I'm just not there yet. Yeah. And that's why I'm still in therapy.
Yeah. I mean, hey, feel the anger. Feel the anger, because there's something below that, right? I get it. It's, you almost feel like if I let my guard down, this son of a bitch is going to come back and get me. So I'm watching you, right?
Yes. Yeah. In my own way. Yes.
But I think that is really valuable advice of, you know, like one therapist told me, and granted, I don't have inflammatory bowel disease, I'll qualify this, but my therapist called me out on like the self-talk that I have, which is, you know, I hold myself to a very different standard than I hold everybody else to, you know? So why am I treating myself worse than I treat other people? I would not hold other people to the same standards I hold myself to. Same thing, you know, like my self-talk to my body in this case is really incredibly negative, and I would not tell my friend who has Crohn's disease not to celebrate a moment. So it's okay for me to do that, you know, but it's okay to recognize you're not ready for it too.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I think sometimes even so, instead of celebrating, maybe just having a neutral, I'm not celebrating. I'm not going to be anxious. I'm just going to sit in a neutral space of the clinical fact is I had a clean scan, neutral. Maybe I don't know. Maybe that's a place to start.
That's so funny that you said that, because even you saying that made me angry.
So I'm going to say something that's going to make you really pissed off. You're going to like sit at the table and be like, I'm done with this interview. Cut it.
That's it. We're done, Alicia.
Yes. I'm going to tell you something that's probably going to make you angry.
Yes.
I'm going to say it anyways, because I feel like
it's
to you. Robin, you deserve a clean scan. You deserve
you're right.
to feel good. You deserve it. You deserve it. So you can be angry at me and flip a table when we're done, but I think that's not something that we often don't hear coming from other people. And sometimes, you know, eventually we'll get there ourselves. And I think that's another way we support ourselves in each other in this community, is to say, you know, Robin, you're not in a place to hold this right now, but I'm here to hold space for you as a friend, whether I have Crohn's or not. You know, I've got, you know, everyone has something. Everyone has some sort of chronic something. But to say, you know, at the very foundation, yes, our bodies have really put us through some shit, but it's the same body that just produced a clean scan. And she deserves a clean scan. Maybe if you third person it, it's the same body.
Okay, you could probably gonna want to cut this out too, Alicia. When I am third personing my body, I'm like, she is the scrub that TLC sings about, hanging out the passenger side of her best friend's ride. Like, that is my body. My body is the scrub. Like I am trying to like drive this car and my body is over here hanging out, trying to holler at somebody else.
Yeah.
I don't want no scrubs.
It's okay to feel scrubby, but you're not. You're the driver.
I mean, with a cultural reference like that, Robin, how can I possibly cut that out?
I mean,
really?
I don't think you can. Fun fact, TLC was my first concert at 15. It was TLC, Montel Jordan, Boyz II Men.
We were meant to be best friends.
I am certain that we are. And this is the first of many conversations. I feel it in my bones. Okay, so now that I've pissed you off, Robin.
Now that I'm pissed off, can we talk about body dysmorphia? Because we've had, I don't know if you know Stacey Collins. She's a registered dietitian that specializes in IBD, and she's been on the show a couple of times. And she had that too when she was in college, losing lots of weight, super sick, but getting complimented on how she looked. And when I read that in your book, I was just like, oh, why? But can you talk about that part of it a little bit?
Absolutely. It goes back to what Alicia said about expectations of women, and we're not supposed to be angry, and we're not supposed to be, messy, and also the smaller the better, right? I mean, I think I naturally was I just was in a smaller body as a child. I just naturally was. So I think I had issues in general, feeling that was an expectation that I had to cling to. And then when I started getting sick before I was diagnosed, I mean, wow, a straight line to like love, acceptance, and like praise was how my body looked. And it was really hard to square with, I feel awful, but I look amazing. And it took me, a long time, I would say up until a year ago, to really fully grasp the level of body dysmorphia that I have had to struggle with and the disordered thoughts I've had to deal with since then. I recently, over the last year and a half, gained probably more weight than I ever have, minus being on steroids, like being at a healthy weight and then gaining weight, I should say, because we know that gaining weight's a really good thing when you are malnourished. But it was the first time that I didn't hold on to like a thought of, before I'd be like, and I'm not going to say numbers or sizes because I think that's very triggering for people in eating disorder recovery. And I think numbers are bullshit anyways. But since I was probably 16, I've worn the same dress size and pant size, except for when I've been sick and then it's gone down, right? I'm 42 years old. I recently cleaned out my room and I got rid of every effing pair of pants, every dress that didn't fit. And I was like, what made me think I was intended to be the same size I was when I was 16 as a 42-year-old adult woman who is capable of so many more things than being attractive and small? Like, I'm getting rid of them. I'm releasing myself from it. I don't want to get back in that size. F it, And there's something so freeing about that. But, my sister has Crohn's as well. And I know that she struggles with this because after she had her third baby in 4 years, she was so sick. We were on vacation, and I'm not lying to you, her skin was like hanging on her body. She looked like death. And I would hear people compliment her. And she was like, I honestly think I'm going to die. She's like, I think I know when I'm not responding to any treatment. I think I'm going to die. Of course, that was very terrifying. She got on infusion medication and it's been wonderful. It's the first thing, Entyvio is the first thing that's ever helped her. However, it also helped her become a healthy, normal adult woman size. And she's like, I am having such a hard time because your whole life you get told, oh my God, people would tell me, I wish I had like a little bit of Crohn's. I'm like, really? You want to shit blood? You want to take a sip of water and you want to shit yourself in the middle of a day? Cool. Let's talk about that. But you know what's so messed up? In some people's minds, they are like, yeah, it's worth it to be thin. And so I really had to work through understanding that, and this is another thing that really pisses me off too. Weight is not a sign of health. It is not a sign of health. And I will tell you, when I'm in a smaller body, I am so sick. But the world sees me as, oh my God, you are so amazing. Like, you're disciplined. And I wish I could da. I mean, I don't care who you are. It feels good to get compliments. And so it just messes with you. And I didn't realize truly until I became an adult. I was diagnosed at 17, my senior year in high school. I don't think it was an accident that almost 1 year to the day of my diagnosis, I became bulimic. I think I definitely had disordered eating pre my sickness, obviously during my sickness, after my sickness. And it was the anger, it was the pissed offness, but it was also like, wait a minute. Now I can't present how people want me to present. So what do I do now? I don't want to be sick, but the only way to be that way. And look, it's just messed up. And I started doing more research for the book, and I didn't realize that people who have IBD have a higher propensity for eating disorders. something else we're not talking about. I thought for years that my bulimia was my fault, that I was defective, I was broken, I was just a messed up kid. I was ashamed of it. I was so ashamed to write about that in the book. I really struggled with it. My kids never knew. I was like, God, people are going to read this and think I'm like a mess. And I was like, no, I was none of those things that I told myself I was. I was a sick kid who didn't have the tools to deal with her grief and her fear. So long answer, but it's very complicated. And I would ask a piece of advice for people who are listening. If you see someone who has recently lost a lot of weight, please don't come at them with a compliment. They might not be intending to lose a lot of weight. And so my aunt actually recently did. And I said to her, I said, hey, it's really great to see you. I didn't say you look great. I said, are you feeling okay? And she said, yeah, why? And I said, I just wanted to ask because I noticed that, you've lost a little bit of weight. And I just wanted to make sure that you're feeling okay. I didn't compliment her. I was very neutral about it, acknowledged how she was feeling. And she was like, you know what? No one's ever said it to me like that. And I was like, who knows if she's in the throes of an eating disorder? Because P.S., it does happen to people other than young white girls. So I just think we need to be really careful about the words we choose and how we, especially with young girls, the things we say to them. There is so much more to a young woman than her freaking body and her appearance, but that's where we go to instantly. Again,
we've had several guests recently talk about language, specifically like how doctors talk about failing medications, making patients feel like it's their fault, right? But this is another thing. This is like an extension of that, just in general, the language that we use.
Yeah.
And
well, it's interesting because no one ever, not one physician, gastroenterologist, no one has ever asked me about my emotional well-being or my mental health. Never, not once. And I don't understand. I mean, I understand that's not what they do, quote unquote, but we need to have those conversations. And yes, it's one's fault.
No, and I do think we're starting to see a lot more of a trend towards these like kind of centers of wellness, essentially, where you have your gastroenterologist, but they're also bringing in therapists and dietitians and all these things that we know are all associated with this disease. And so I'm encouraged by that. But I think you're right. They don't feel equipped to deal with your brain. They don't feel equipped to deal with your emotions. And so if they open the door, they can't close it. I think that's really what it is. They're like, if they need help, they know where to get help. I can deal with this thing, but if I open the door, I don't have the resources to be able to share with them or the tools to be able to help them. And it's probably more than I have allocated time because of health insurance as well. So there's lots of layers to that.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's messy. And you know what? That gut brain connection. I mean, there's so much that's being learned about that. There are more, there's more nerves in your gut than there is in your brain, or something like there's more serotonin in your gut than there is in your brain. So, I would challenge that. How do we challenge our physicians to think about it? I do talk about my emotional and mental health when I meet with my gastro. And, for me personally, I know that didn't cause my illness. I also know for me personally, it is the number one trigger for a flare-up for me. Number one, more than food, more than anything else.
A lot of people talk about that. A lot of people talk about like stress, especially being, something that really they notice that they're symptomatic after that. And again, there's also more research around this. We've had Josie McGarva, who was a psychology student who was working on her master's degree. And then, a psychologist, Tiffany Taft, who this is her research is around
Love
this.
Tiffany. I quoted her in the book. She is chef's kiss. Shout out to Tiffany Taft. The work that she's done with PTSD and IBD patients is awesome, and it's brave and it's smart, and she is just such a champion in this space, and I can't say enough about her. She's incredible.
Yeah, she's kicking all the asses. Yeah, I know we're a big fan of Tiffany, and it was so great to have her on because I think what she was talking about, so many people have responded to us and said, yes, I get that. Like, I feel that. And, and this whole idea of disordered eating around this disease, it's one of these things where like, after we start talking about it, I'm going, I can't believe we didn't think that this was the case, because food feels dangerous to a lot of folks with inflammatory bowel disease because you eat and you don't feel well afterwards. And so of course you're going to develop like a very strange and strained relationship to food. And so, yes, it sort of makes sense that people would develop disordered eating when you have this disease.
When any human being rapidly loses weight, like through an illness, that can often trigger an eating disorder because your brain needs 500 calories a day minimum to function. And so if you're not absorbing nutrients from your food, if you're very quickly over a short period of time, I mean, that's just a medical fact. It can trigger that. It's very layered. It's very complicated. My therapist told me something that literally blew my mind like 6 months ago. And I was talking to her about feeling a lot of shame around, as recently as 2020, really struggling with body image stuff and food stuff and the fact that I was bulimic in college. And I mean, I couldn't even say that word for decades. And, just how my Crohn's kind of played a role in all of it. And she said, I don't think it's strange. And I don't, obviously you shouldn't feel ashamed, but she's like, maybe it was your way as a kid of like subconsciously was like, I'm going to find something to make this disease, find the one thing that I can benefit from, which of course is not a benefit, but she's like, you were doing what you could to survive and protect the fear and the anxiety. And honestly, the grief. I mean, I think that's something else I write about in the book a lot is I didn't understand that I needed to, deserved to grieve my diagnosis. It literally did not occur to me until I was 29 in that really, really sick year and came face to face with like losing my entire everything, rectum, colon, all of it. And I went through kind of a depression because it was the first time in my life I allowed myself to like properly grieve my health. And no, I don't find that people talk about that a lot. I really truly thought that grief was reserved for death of a loved one only. But I think that's something really important for folks to know is that there is a grieving process that needs to take place and it will hover in your throat, in your chest. It'll hover and it'll wait for you.
Yeah, we had a really great therapist on that. She has created a grief wheel around chronic illness, the grief around chronic illness.
Really? That's awesome.
Yeah. And it's interesting as she talks about how basically you can kind of come on and off that wheel too. And it's okay to sort of revisit parts of the wheel because it is not a linear process. It's a wheel, and so these things are going to change and shift. And yes, there is definitely a grieving process around being diagnosed with a chronic illness. That's a hard thing. That's really hard. Because you're right. So many people say, well, but I'm still alive. I didn't die. Or it's not cancer. That's another great one.
Right. It could be worse. I hate that.
It could be worse.
It could be
it
worse.
Could be better too.
That's right.
A lot better too. Let me tell you. And I will tell you, I probably hovered around anger, denial, and bargaining from like a good decade and a half. And I do think there's something valuable. And again, it's hard work to do. And you're like, God, I'm doing enough hard work already. But there's something about, and I write about this a lot in the book, is like, if you think about a child, if you've ever been around either your own child, a niece or nephew, a tired kid at Target, when a kid starts throwing a tantrum and the parent is elevated and matches their emotions, it becomes explosive. And I had this epiphany that that's what I was doing with my body for many years. I would start having symptoms. So it's like this little child saying, please help me. I don't feel well. And it was acting like a bratty, tired toddler. And what was I doing? I was screaming back at it to shut up and go away. And really, when I thought about treating my person as a child and saying, when my Crohn's is acting up, it's like that little kid that's like, please, I'm tired, help me, and a 3-year-old doesn't know how to ask for a nap. They don't know how to say I'm tired. And I just, I stayed up too late or I had too much junk food or whatever. And so I think if I could come at my body with more compassion, like I would a young, bratty toddler who needs a nap, it was amazing. The changes I started to notice, but it took a good 15 years for me to get there. So it's a journey.
Yeah, I get that. But I really like that concept of kind of treating your body as a toddler. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah. I'm curious because one of the things Robin and I were chatting about before you jumped on with us is that, you added in sort of journal prompts at the end of places in your book. And that allows people to, as they're reading it and as they're having their own thoughts about this, really write it down and reflect. What has been the response that you've gotten from people that have read your book and have utilized that? Have you gotten some really interesting feedback?
Yeah, I will say this is completely like dorky, but I'm going to admit it because we're amongst friends. One of my favorite things to do is look at Amazon reviews. It like baffles me that people I don't even know will take the time to like write them and say the things that they're saying. People have reached out to me on my Instagram and my DMs and have said, this book changed my life. And I'm like, really? So I was really intentional about wanting to include the journal prompts because for me, writing is the best way I can process emotion. It took me a while to process emotion in real time. I'm like a delayed processor. And I think it has a lot to do with my Crohn's and all the things I was feeling for so long. But I love the idea of I wanted to create a quiet space for readers to reflect on their own journey. Because Christine Rich, who is she? She's like some woman from Ohio. Great. I don't know who you are, so I wanted to create a space and permission to say all the things that I know many people have felt and thought, but weren't actually saying and writing. I wanted to create that space. And then I also wanted to create a moment in time for the readers to reflect on their own journey through their own experiences. Because Robin and I both have IBD. I have no idea what it's like to have IBD for Robin. We have the same disease. I have no idea how it feels to be her. And so I wanted to include these journal prompts to hopefully encourage readers when they're ready, if they're ready. And again, it can be any chronic illness. It doesn't have to be Crohn's. It can be anxiety. It can be addiction. It can be a negative chronic thought pattern that's just not serving you. But taking the time to kind of work through your own stuff is really, really, I wanted this to be a space for people, not just for me to dump my story. And so I'm a big fan of anytime I have a book, I write, I dog ear, I highlight, I write, like I'm a nut job. All my books, probably I look like a crazy person, but again, I wanted to create a space, not just a book. And so it was really important to me to have those prompts in there. And the response has been great. I mean, I think people have, one of the biggest things I've heard was, I feel so much less alone now. I thought I was the only one who felt this way. And I was like, yeah, I get it. And I think that's what the power of speaking to these things and writing them down. And, I really at first was editing myself very much when I started writing. And I was like, I can't write about having a diarrhea river running down my leg on a hot July day. Like, I can't write about that. And then I challenged myself and I was like, you know what, if you're not going to write the truth, don't write the book. It would be a disservice. And so, yeah.
And that's what we try to do here is share everyone's story so you don't feel alone.
Yeah. There's power in just saying the thing out loud.
Yeah.
Saying I'm scared, saying I'm pissed, saying I'm grateful, all of it.
Yeah.
Because honestly, I think that I've never had any other chronic diseases, but something like Crohn's IBD is very isolating. People are rallying around you. There's not communities rallying around you. You're spending a lot of time alone in the bathroom, like no one's hanging out, holding your hand while you're having your worst symptoms. And so I really wanted to just find a way to create community with people I've never even met. And I've built some, I had multiple phone conversations with people who messaged me. People still follow up with me. I mean, I encourage people, please send me a DM if you have questions or interested in talking more about the book, or just, there's just nothing to be ashamed of. And I think I spent so many years feeling ashamed of my body. I mean, just so ashamed. I just felt like I had to hide all the time, and I felt gross and I felt broken. And I had a feeling if I was feeling that way, other people might have been too. And that's a really shitty way to live. And sometimes I still feel that way. I'm not saying it's all rainbows and sunshine. I mean, there are days when I'm just like, ugh. But I have the tools and I have the awareness. And for me, journaling and writing is one of those things that when my mind starts getting away from me and when that mean voice in my head when that scrub starts trying to take a hold of the wheel, I'm just like, back off.
I am hoping to be where you are in 5 years of therapy. Just my little baby, 1 year of therapy.
You're scratching the surface.
I'm just scratching the surface. I'm like literally starting to cry while you're talking. And I had a tiny little bit of an epiphany while you were talking with what you were saying, where I thought, I am in my body, I am doing things and living a big life in spite of my body instead of because of my body, because my body is allowing, I am about to start sobbing.
Good. Do it. Get ugly. I love an ugly cry.
I am doing things like we just took this big vacation. I just went to California to see my girls for the holidays. I'm going to New York in a couple of days and then Chicago in March. Like I'm doing all these things in spite of my body, kind of like as a fuck you to my body. Like, I'm not going to let you stop me from doing these things, instead of looking at it like I can still do all of these things. My body is still taking me to all of these great places and, allowing me to live this kind of life. I'm doing it in spite of my body, because my body, especially recently, because of all of the stuff that I've gone through with the J pouch, like I've just been like, my body's an asshole.
Yeah.
I hope you share that with your therapist as well, just as
I'm going to.
Well, it's going to be forever cemented in this podcast. So just have your therapist listen to this one. Robin, I understand. I think what I really feel happy for you about is that I think it's this journey where I'm going to do this despite, like you said, I'm going to just grind it out and I'm not going to. When I learned the power of a nap, changed my world. I thought a nap was admitting defeat. So when you can start even just to notice the difference, which it sounds like you are at least noticing it, of I'm going to do this just to I wrote in the book, fuck all the way off a cliff, Crohn's disease, to I have this illness and my body can still do things like, not always, but hold my kids, hug my husband, go on trips. I'm very fortunate that I have a really wonderful job and a wonderful career that I can get on a plane and travel. And it's great. Now there's times when I won't be able to do that. And I don't have to live my life anymore fearing those moments. I can be fully present for the moments where I feel good. And for a long time, I felt like there was this dark cloud hanging over me, don't get too comfortable, because The big bad Crohn's disease is going to jump out and get you if you get too comfortable and too cocky. And what I have learned is that's actually not the case. The cockier I get and the more confident I get, nothing bad happens. The world doesn't fall. You know what I mean? It's like, and I mean within my body, not within my personality.
Yeah.
It's, maybe this new clean scope for the moment is a little olive branch saying, you can trust me even for a little bit, even though I know you don't want to.
Like, when you say that to me, you need to put in there, this episode is a therapy session. So please be warned that when you say that to me, I'm like, oh, hell no, bitch. No, this is not an olive branch. Like, my immediate reaction is like,
of course,
all the way off a cliff, Crohn's disease.
Yeah,
like,
because it's hard to be, because you never wanted to let yourself, I get it. I mean, that's what chronic is about. I was so afraid to let myself just, it's like, Alicia, you said the grief wheel. There's the Crohn's wheel. There's the IBD wheel. It's not a linear thing. There are good days. There are bad days. There are good months. There are bad months. There are good years. There are bad years. My 30s, once I finally, got serious about really taking care of all of myself and really facing some pretty hard truths I didn't want to face. It took a while to get that initial really, really bad flare and under control. I went from like 31 to 37 without a flare up. And I had flare ups every single year. I don't know. It was just something that kind of was unlocked when I just started kind of calling a truce with my body, that I was like, at first it was like, I don't know if I'm going to trust you, but I see you. Okay, fine. And then it's little, it doesn't happen overnight. And so I don't want to come across as if it does, because it is a process. I've heard, people say there's no there. I think Glennon Doyle says that a lot. There's no there, and there isn't. But the days where it feels okay, physically and emotionally, I'm just going to take it.
But I think it's really important that you highlighted that this was, and we hate the word journey, but it was, it was a journey, and it was hard won and hard fought along the way, that you had to do therapy. You had to learn to trust yourself, because I think it can feel, oh, look at her. She did it. It must not be that hard. How come I'm struggling? And then you have the whole other layer of, shame that goes along with it, of like, but this other person did it. How come I can't trust my body? How come I can't get myself to that place? But it's hard. This is hard.
It's so hard. And I will tell you, I can sit here and talk this now because I'm not in a flare up. The rubber's going to meet the road when, I will have a flare up again. I will. I hope, it doesn't get to the point where I'm like on the cusp of like pretty major surgery. But what I realize is, even if that happens, I've come to a place where I realize I will be okay. And there's, you what if. I'm really trying to challenge myself. And I don't do it all the time. But when I catch myself what ifing, trying to switch it to an even if I have another flare up, even if I have to have a bag, even if I need to have multiple surgeries. Okay, then what? And just that little change, it's just a trick that again, I don't always do it. I can go down a rabbit hole of fear and shame and panic, like the best of them. But again, these are just tools. There's tools in our toolbox that I just wish that I would have had when I was younger and earlier in my disease state. I think I wasted a lot of time, and I spent a lot of years in shame and really self-hatred. I mean, really, I remember there were teenage through probably 29. I hated even like being near a mirror. Like, if we were at a restaurant and I was near a mirror, I'd be like disgusted. I couldn't figure out, like, where does this loathing come from? Like, and again, I would have never even said that out loud before, because I would have said, oh, that sounds like whatever. But it makes sense now that I've taken the time to sit with it and reflect and do the work of, it's an excavation. And it's hard and it's messy, but it's worth it.
And it's cyclical, because I will say that I've been, 23 years. This mental state that I'm in right now really was a slow process of developing when I started to have a bad flare again in 2018. This, where I am now mentally, has been, my brain's been working on it since 2018. Whenever my diagnosis changed from colitis to Crohn's, and then my scopes kept being bad. So, and then my surgery was bad. So it's just like a little buildup of stuff. And so I know here in my brain, I'm pointing to my brain, everyone, I know in my brain that I will get to where you are, because I was there before. But here, when I talked about my chest getting tight earlier, it gets tight a lot now. And I know that I am not physically or emotionally ready to get to where my brain knows I will be.
Right.
So,
and that's
hearing you talk about it gives me hope, but also pisses me off.
Absolutely. I would probably, if I was having a flare and I heard myself talk, I'd be like, just shut up. Okay. But I will say, in those moments, I think the best we can do is ask for grace. You don't have to be okay right now. It's not okay. Again, I mean, I think pretending is exactly what we don't want to do. I think when someone is in the middle of a flare up, they have every right to be angry and afraid and pissed and frustrated and cynical. I mean, when I had that really bad flare up at 29, I was the most cynical human being on the planet. But you know what? I was sick and I was in pain, and I give myself grace for that time. I did the best I actually could. And in a weird way, like for me, it had to get to that point for me to wake up and make a change, because I was not in a good way. And I think I'm just hard-headed enough that I needed something kind of dramatic to wake my ass up. And I could have had surgery. And you know what? Even if I did, it would have been a different, again, there's the word journey for me. And I would have figured it out, because I would have had to, which sucks. No one wants to have to figure that out. And right.
I say that a lot, and a lot.
So do you see?
I know that there's an and. Yes. I love it. Yes.
I have a tattoo on my wrist of is that an ampersand? Is that how you
Yes,
say?
ampersand. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I love it.
That's
so
my constant reminder of, it's not an either or world, it's a both and world.
I am curious, you've mentioned shame and Brene Brown in the same breath when we talk about Brene as well. One of the things she talks about in her book is this idea of when you sort of speak your shame out into the world, how it can be really releasing and all these things, but you can get the shame spiral afterwards, or the shame hangover, as she's
the vulnerability hangover.
There you go, that one.
Queen of a vulnerability hangover. Yep.
Well, I'm curious if you had a little bit of that, because you did put a whole lot of things out into the world very publicly in writing, forever documented.
Yes.
Did that happen?
I almost didn't hit publish. I mean, I tortured myself, and my husband was like, "Oh my God, Chris, just hit send." And I was like, I don't think I want to. I think this was a nice experience. I did it for me, and I don't want to publish it. And he's like, "Well, you didn't do it for you. You've been saying that this whole time." And I was like, fair enough. Yes, I had a vulnerability hangover, especially because, and this was just my experience, and maybe it's because my head was in the sand. And, for a long time, I didn't want to be part of this quote unquote community. I was like, nope, I'm good. That's for sick people, and I'm just fine. But for me, I didn't see women who were in corporate America in positions of leadership positions talking so openly about chronic illness, about mental health, about bodily function. I let it all out there about eating disorders. I mean, it was again, everything went in there. And I thought, you know what, if we ever want to change culture, if we ever want to change that feeling of aloneness, if not me, who? And again, I'm nobody. I've not been on Good Morning America. I'm not doing circuits or anything, but for at least 50 people who have left a review on Amazon, I know for at least 50 people, they feel less alone. They've told me. And so to me, I was at the end of the day, I was as honest as I could be. And that gave me the confidence to hit send, because I was being as truthful as I could be. And that to me felt like I was honoring the reason why I did this. If I would have talked only about think positive and toxic positivity and blah, 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 to be very clear, it's interesting, Robin, you opened up saying it was hard to read your book. I almost couldn't read it. It's not sunshine and rainbows. There's a lot of ugliness in this book. And I wanted to show it, because I think to keep that lid on so tight of perfection and control and I'm fine is so exhausting. And our little autoimmune diseased ravaged bodies are tired enough. There's something so freeing about just putting it out there. So yes, I had a vulnerability hangover, and it was totally worth it.
Glad to hear it.
I still cringe when someone tells me they read my book in real life that I work with, and I'm like, oh my God, they know everything.
I would struggle with that as well. There are times where even just having this podcast out in the world, where the things we talk about, I'm like, oh God, this is out in the world forever. Yep. But you know what? You guys are telling the truth. I think truth tellers are the ones who probably do feel the most vulnerable, but I can sleep well at night knowing that I'm telling my truth. And I think that what you guys are doing also, telling the good, the bad, the ugly, the real is just so brave and so necessary. And I think one of the many things that I think Brene has brought to, the cultural zeitgeist, or whatever you want to call it, is this: more people are talking about things more vulnerably and authentically. And I know that when I was writing the book, I interviewed a lot of women specifically. And I used to say the worst thing that could ever happen to me was to have a bag. I was so afraid of it. This was my pissed off phase. There's this whole phase where people are posting pictures of their ostomy, their bag. And I was like, nope, delete, don't want to see it. I was like, I don't want to know that's a possibility. I don't want to see it. I don't believe you. Nope. It was just head in the sand. Not for me, thank you. And after I spoke to, and these women were so gracious with their stories, I truly believe that, getting surgery and having a bag is actually not the worst thing that could happen to me. It isn't. But I was so afraid to even
broach the subject or hear about it because I was afraid. And so I think that just shows us like taking that chance to talk about the thing that you're most afraid of with someone who you trust, who has your best interest at heart, is really powerful. And it was very healing. Like the worst thing isn't getting a bag. And so many women were like, it saved my life. I love my bag. And I was like, bullshit. They're like, nope. And so it really did just, bring a different point of view that I am really grateful that I finally was brave enough to open up to, because I was making the imagination that I had in my head, the stories I was telling myself were so much worse than just facing the reality. And it's still scary.
Yes, we've definitely had some folks on here that have talked about, like you said, going into a surgery to have an ostomy, fighting it, kicking and screaming and saying, I will never be okay with this.
That's where the practice of radical acceptance comes in, which I would say if anyone's struggling, that's a very therapy term. So if you are in therapy or thinking about therapy, talking about radical acceptance, it's a really interesting thing to explore. And I would say, I really just want to emphasize the point of I hope I'm not coming across as toxic positivity, rah, rah, rah. Because it's really fucking hard.
It's hard. You are not coming across as rah, 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 like jazz hands.
I do think the things you're saying will hopefully feel very hopeful for a lot of people, because you have put in the work and you've gone through that slog and you've done that very, very, very hard work. Mm-hmm. And now you can say these things and say, this is the things that I've learned along the way. And it's good. Sometimes maybe it'll help some people move through that process a little bit faster, but it's still ugly along the way. God, therapy sucks.
And also, I just want to say, if you don't have access to therapy, go actually read our show notes. And we have a link to the Grief Wheel for chronic illness, and
awesome.
Join a support group. Crohn's and Colitis Foundation has support groups. I think Girls with Guts has support groups. They used to have support groups. There are support groups out there, which I know support groups are sometimes thought negatively, but it really does help you get through.
Well, and I would say, to your point of not being ready, if you're not ready to have it all out there with some strangers, we live in an age and a world where, there's Facebook communities. And I would say also, again, be in your body, notice your lumps, notice what feels good and what doesn't feel good. You can join something and bow out. If you're like, this is too negative, I'm not ready to hear all of this information. Again, 5 years ago, to hear people talk about their experience with surgery and bags, I wasn't ready for it. And that's okay. It's okay to step in and then step away. So just take care of yourself and protect your emotions, and, don't push too hard, because it won't be worth it.
Right. Well, and I mean, therapy and these things we're talking about is just like medication. Sometimes it works for people and sometimes it doesn't. And that's not about you. It's about the thing, and it's just sometimes your body or your brain that's just not the thing for you. And so, but you're right, Robin. I think it is helpful to acknowledge that there's privilege with having access to mental health. And it sure fucking shouldn't be, but it's a privilege at the moment. But, there are also, you mentioned, Christine, journaling and spending a lot of time journaling. Even doing that is therapeutic and can help process things. There are books that can help walk you through some of this. There's things for you to be able to learn to do some of this on your own: podcasts, webinars, YouTube videos. There's lots of sort of ways to learn about how to care for yourself that I think can still be really beneficial to people and free, that kind of stuff. So there's access to some of these tools without the practitioner, which is maybe not super, you want to be careful, but there are ways to continue to work on your mental health outside of therapy.
And something else to note is a lot of workplace wellness programs now. And again, if you have the privilege and the access, a lot of companies now through their insurance will offer up to 5 to 6 free therapy sessions. And so I think taking advantage of that, and then also just reaching out to people who you feel comfortable with. If there's someone that you can turn to and be like, okay, so I'm actually not fine, even though I've been saying I'm fine. And I just need you to sit with me because it sucks. I hope that there's someone can turn to say that. And it's interesting. My husband, always said, he's like, I never understood, because you used to tell me that you were fine. And I would see you running around to a million activities, a million things. But then I would see you going to the bathroom a million times. And I would notice that you were wasting away and that your skin was gray and you were just tired all the time. He's like, it didn't make sense because you were telling me you were fine and doing all these things, so it's don't underestimate that someone as close as a spouse cannot get it. And oftentimes they probably don't if you haven't let them in.
Yeah, of course they're going to give you the benefit of the doubt. Your spouse doesn't want to think you're lying, about
Yep.
stuff.
Yeah.
So, and I'm sure there's also a self-preservation mechanism in there too. If like, he wants you to be fine, he doesn't want you to be sick. And so of course he's going to believe you. And because otherwise it's scary. There's lots to talk about, but we have to end though by asking you, if you had one piece of advice for the IBD community, what would it be?
I think we talked about it. Just understand that your mental health and emotional health is part of your plan of care, and really thinking through, if your doctor isn't talking to you about that. For me, taking care of my mental and emotional health is just as important as my medication. It's just as important as my blood tests and my scans. And so if no one has told you that, I am here to tell you that it is part of your plan of care, and it is helpful. Learning how to manage, and it's not woo-woo, learning how to manage stress, learning how to get tools to deal with. I mean, having Crohn's and going through what many of us have gone through is traumatic. And that's not being dramatic. Ask Tiffany Tack, she knows. So my one thing would be just take care of your spirit as well as your colon. And don't be afraid to say the word rectum.
Yeah, that's perfect.
Christine, thank you so much for joining us. It was really, truly a pleasure. And we are grateful that you wrote this book. We're grateful to have you on the podcast. So thank you. And cheers, everyone, for joining us.
Cheers. Hey, everybody. This is Christine. If you like this episode, please rate, review, subscribe, and share with your friends. And remember, no shame in the game of IBD.